So good morning, everyone. Welcome to 912 Strategy Session, the science of reading in secondary classrooms. All content areas are welcome. And if you're not 912, you're welcome as well. My name is Morgan Hallabrin. I'm very honored to be here today. Quickly, a little bit about myself. I currently am the Assistant Director of ELA and Social Studies in Portland Public Schools. I have the honor of working with the incredible high school ELA and Social Studies teachers. Before that, I was an administrator at Grant High School. Prior to that, I taught English and reading for almost 20 years. I taught at Park Rose High School, and then a majority of my teaching career was in the Bay Area, which is why I chose the Golden Gate Bridge as my background. So we're going to start. I'm going to ask you 3 questions just to kind of, we'll have a warm welcome, and then I want to gather some information, and then we'll move forward. So if you were not at this conference, where would you be and what would you be doing? If you could just pop that in the chat. I would be sleeping because that is what I'm good at and what I love to do. So if you take a moment and just pop that in the chat, I'd love to see. I see hiking. Yeah, it's not raining, but you can hike in the rain too. Yard work. My husband's doing that. Ooh, the bowling alley. Nice. Nice. We have walking or reading. Ooh, we have 3-year-old energy in the house. That's good. 3-year-old energy is always good. It's a wellspring. Reading. Ooh, pickleball. I haven't played pickleball yet, but I was invited to a pickleball game, so I'll be doing that soon, hopefully. All right. Well, I appreciate you all participating in that. And then my next question for you is, I would love to gather some information of who's in the room. So if you could in the chat now list the grades and the subjects that you teach. I see 912 English, close to my heart. Oh, I see Spanish language arts, 6-8 special education with a reading and writing focused. We have a retired SPED teacher, 612. Wonderful. 7-8 ELA, reading intervention, teaching reading intervention. So it's it's the best. Grade 9 and 11 English. 9th graders are hilarious. And this is the time the 11th graders, right? They're gearing up for their senior year and really looking forward. Wonderful. I appreciate you letting me know who's in the Zoom room. And my last question before we start is, how well do you know the science of reading? 1, you can do a 1, 2, 3, or a 4, but just to orient you, a 1 is not at all. A 4 is I could present in your place. We have a 3. Great. Okay. So we have some 3s and 2s. Nice 3s, 2, 3. Okay. This is great. This is great information. So with this information in mind, what I'm going to do is that I'm actually going to I'm going to read you the essential questions, and then I'll kind of talk to you about how we're going to spend our time today. So the essential questions that I'm attempting to answer today are: 1, what does the science of reading look like at the secondary level? 2, what is the difference between content area literacy and discipline-specific literacy? And 3, what are some high leverage instructional strategies that support literacy across content areas? I'm going to move quick, like because of our initial formative assessment where I had a lot of 2s and 3s, I'm going to move at a clip through our first part of the science of reading, and then we'll spend a little bit more time talking about strategies. And so actually, what I would like to actually spend a moment on is reading this definition. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask for your help. You don't have to come you don't have to come on camera, but I would love your voices. So I would like to read this definition, actually doing 3 strategies that some of you may know and do, and some of you may be review, and some of you it may be new. So if I could get your participation, that would really be wonderful. So what we're first going to do is this first question: what is the science of reading? I'm going to read the question, and then I'll have you repeat it right after I read it. Okay, so I'll read the question, and then I'll point to you, and I'll have you all read it together. So what is the science of reading? Your
What
turn.
what is the science of reading?
Awesome. That was great for our first time on Zoom on a Saturday morning. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. The first sentence of this definition, when I leave out a word, I'm going to have you fill it in. For example, I'll say the science of reading is and I'll pause and you'll all say vast. Okay. And we'll do this with the first sentence. The science of reading is a
Vast.
interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about
Reading.
Reading.
and issues related to reading and
Writing.
Writing.
awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Now the third sentence we're going to read together and do a choral read. So on the count, we're just going to do it with that third sentence. I'm going to count to 3 and let's give it a whirl and try it together and see what happens. 1, 2, 3. This
This research
research
has been conducted
over
over the last 5 decades
across
the world,
and
and
it
and it
is
is derived from
thousands of studies
studies
conducted in multiple languages. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. And then the last sentence, which you'll notice is quite long and has a lot of punctuation, a lot of syntactical moves. I'm going to have you practice something I call mumble reading, or that's what I was taught it's called. And you're going to take your finger and you're going to plug your ears lightly and you're going to mumble read it to yourself and you'll be able to hear your own voice. So take a second and read that to yourself. The science. Okay. So thank you so much for your participation. So before we zoom out and talk about those 4 strategies, I first want to talk about the content in this, like the definition. Can I just get one person to just come off mute and share something that resonates with them or that has resonated with them in the past when they've read this or resonates with them currently? Can I just get someone to come off mute and share?
I'll go ahead and share. That very last part about how can we most effectively assess and teach and improve student outcomes. Having been in education for a really long time, you see the whole spectrum of things that we've done and tried. So getting to a science-based place for it is good.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for coming off mute and sharing. And I agree. And this is 5 decades worth of research, studies conducted in multiple languages, right? So it's a pretty strong foundational understanding of what we need to do and how we can move forward. Speaking of what we need to do, so if you take a look at this, one moment. I had to pop up. There we go. If you take a look at this next slide, content strategies for fluency, we moved through 4 different strategies that can help students improve their fluency. Actually, the first thing we did was number 4. They're out of order, is repeat after me, right? You can do that with a word, with a question, and with phrases. And what that does is that helps students see the way that you pronounce words and the cadence, and then they can say that back out loud and mirror it, practicing again their fluency. Another really wonderful reason that that's super powerful, the repeat after me is incredibly powerful, is because it gives students the opportunity to be in community and like in unison with their voices, which we know studies show really builds community and a sense of belonging. And it's a low stakes way for our multilingual learners to practice saying words and phrases out loud in a safe space. All right. Another strategy we did, we're going to pop up to number 1, is close reading. Not close with an S. That's different. Close with a Z is where you leave out a word or a phrase so the class can fill it in. Again, it gives students the opportunity to kind of be a part of that cadence, which is important for fluency. And also, it's a great way to see who's paying attention. Second semester senior year, I would use it all the time. And I would repeat the sentence and repeat it till I had everyone on board, right? So it can be a 2-for-1 deal. The choral reading where we read together, that again, it helps with fluency in a low stakes way. And mumble reading does all of those things, but the additional thing that mumble reading does is allows students to hear their own voice in a low stakes way, but it's also a really great way for and I in particular with ELA when we're looking at something like poetry and we want students to understand like line breaks and in cadence and meaning. It's a great way to really kind of have that extra layer of listening and comprehension. So these are four really powerful ways to practice fluency with the entire class. And in my opinion, it's a low lift. You don't have to prep for it. I'm going to go over this quickly because I know all of you have a foundational understanding, but the science of reading says that if you see there's four arrows on the top, 5 to 10% of our population, reading seems effortless. 35% reading can be relatively easy to learn with broad instruction, but that 35% needs explicit instruction for spelling and writing. 40 to 45% only learn how to read, spell, and write proficiency with code-based systemic and explicit instruction. And then 10 to 15% of our students, or just people really, right, learn to spell, read, and write. It requires that code-based, systematic, explicit, intensive instruction with frequent repetition. And I know we have some special educators and retired special educators in the Zoom room who know this firsthand. This is again why structured literacy is critical and that we remember in the 6-12 space and really some scholars say in the 4-12 space, which some scholars call adolescent literacy, we have to remember that we have to reteach these strategies as the reading becomes more complex. Reading isn't something you teach once, right? It's something you have to revisit and remodel for our students because the complexity just amps up as the students continue in their education journey. Again, the simple view of reading we'll go over a bit quickly. So we have Goff and Tumner say that this is a multiplication problem. If we want that purple box, if we want reading comprehension, we must have word recognition and language comprehension. It's 1 times 1 equals 1. And if you look below, you see that white rectangle. That's a student who is either a spontaneous reader, as my mother-in-law, a career kindergarten teacher calls them, students who don't need that explicit instruction, or students who've had it. Additionally, we can take a look at this new white rectangle and we can see some students have no word or have little to no word recognition or struggle with it and may have language comprehension, but that doesn't mean they have reading comprehension. Right. And we can look an example of a student like this may be a newcomer, a multilingual learner who is fluent in their first and or subsequent languages and is new to the United States or new to English. And they struggle with decoding, but they have those language comprehension skills. Even though they have those language comprehension skills, they will not show up in reading comprehension without that word recognition. Again, we can look at a student who has word recognition, but no language comprehension or little language comprehension. If that's the case, again, reading comprehension will not be present. An example is me. I am Jewish. I went to Hebrew school growing up and for my bat mitzvah and in Hebrew school, all I learned how to do was decode and write Hebrew. If someone read, I could have dictation and kind of like write a Hebrew sentence. I have no idea what any of it means. Zero. Therefore, I couldn't take a reading comprehension test in Hebrew, right? And so this is an example of maybe some of our secondary students who can decode, but struggle with really creating and sustaining and building meaning. So I'm going to just show you actually one slide. There's 3 subsequent slides after this. I'm going to show you one in the effort of time, but just an example, what do our students experience when they struggle with reading? This is an example of a student who is 70% accurate word recognition. Imagine being 70%, right? That seems like it might be a lot. And it is a body of knowledge, truly. But if we take a look at this passage, in the blank of blank, nothing is blank. Some blank blank life-size blank out of tall blank and shrubs, a blank careful blank and blank can blank blank paths, blank cut and shape plants into blank larger than life and blank leafy blank. What would you do if blank a blank full of these blank? Blank, you walk right in if someone has 70% accuracy, this is what's happening when a student is plunked down in front of a text without any scaffolding or support or modeling, and then sometimes asked questions, asked to read out loud, or asked maybe to write an essay. So I think it's important for me to even remind myself that this could be possibly our students' experiences all the way up to 12th grade and beyond. And then there's 80% and 90% accurate you can look at later. But we know a reader needs to be able to understand 90% of the words in a text to infer the other 10. And again, sometimes you'll be 100% like fluent, but if you continue to challenge yourself throughout your educational experience, you ideally are going to be between that 90 and 100% band and have those skills to infer, which is what we're going to get to in a bit. So we have language comprehension times word recognition equals reading comprehension, the simple view of reading. But let's take a look. Let's go a little bit deeper into the reading rope. Okay. So before we go into the reading rope, I just want to share a strategy with you that is a low lift strategy that is critical, that when I taught, I would sometimes forget because I was moving so quickly. And it's the strategy of, if you take a look by that number 1, previewing the structure of a text. The first time we show, so if we want our students to take a look just at the content of a text, and we want them to spend their cognitive bandwidth on that, it's critical that we take them like on a tour of that text, right? So that they can understand the features and then spend their cognitive energy on the material in the text, right? Examples of that is test layout, lab reports, math textbooks and workbooks, features of a poem, manuals in a CTE class, charts and graphs, right? Taking them on that preview is critical so they can free up that space in their brain to really focus on the cognitive task at hand. I'm going to give you a quick preview of the reading rope. All right. So, because I know that a lot of you are familiar. So if we take a look, we have on the left side, language comprehension on top, word recognition on the bottom. On the right side, all the way over, we have skilled reading, which is also known in the simple view of reading as reading comprehension. And then in the middle, we have these strands of rope. That's fluency. That's the practicing. That's like the practicing of all the skills together, almost like a symphony, right? In order to be fluent and to increase automaticity. Word recognition is what happens ideally kindergarten through 3rd grade. And language comprehension is happening K through 12. What we're going to focus on today is that language comprehension and some strategies that, that can be helpful with attaining background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning. And then we just talked about literacy knowledge, which I'll go back to, which is really previewing the structure of a text, low lift, like really, really, really powerful. So I'm going to first talk about background knowledge. So when we take a look at background knowledge and activating schema, we have to really think about the 2 different ways in which we need to do that. It's critical that students have a body of background knowledge to really hang on to so they can Velcro new information onto it. But I like to think about background knowledge in 2 different ways. We have conceptual background knowledge that students need to know and procedural background knowledge. So an example, and I think it's important for us to really think about and attend to both when students are encountering a new task. So an example of a conceptual background knowledge would be a phenomenological, maybe literary periods, maybe historical periods, or maybe an artistic movement, right? It's those concepts that we want to remind them of or teach them so they can ground their understanding of the task or the reading in those concepts, right? To begin to build those networks of understanding. Additionally, we have procedural background knowledge, right? What are those prior skills and necessary skills to attempt a next step? So for example, let's take ELA for a moment, right? If we're going to have students write a paragraph, let's stick with summary, we're gonna have students write a summary, we might want to go over procedural things, right? For example, we have the age-old tag, right? Title, author, genre. Maybe we feel like it's September and we need to remind our students of title, author, genre, right? Those are those we need that in that first sentence if you're using that frame, right? And we need to remind them of those procedural things, right? In order for them to really take steps towards that task and then consider what conceptual things we need to add first. Second, with vocabulary, I like to think of vocabulary in 4 types. Now, if you do research into vocabulary, people talk about vocabulary in all different ways. People like talk about them in tiers, which I find confusing because I find that it kind of like muddies MTSS language. That's me, but I support if someone finds it helpful. And I like to talk about it in these ways. When we're really thinking about providing students with vocabulary, we need to think about what types of vocabulary are we going to provide them with at what points in the unit. So for example, we have concepts, right? There's concepts we need our students to understand. And I'm going to share a concept map a little later on that I found really helpful. Concepts like, for example, let's say that you are reading, you have an essential question that has the word identity in it for your upcoming ELA unit. Maybe doing a concept map on identity, right? So that students can really grapple with this idea because they're going to be expected to think about it deeply throughout the entirety of the unit. There's also academic vocabulary. Academic vocabulary is what I refer to as that study that came out of New Zealand in 1999 of the meta-analyses of the top words used across disciplines, like analyze, evaluate, define. I think it's important for us to remind our students and to give them the opportunity to remember what the definition of evaluate is before we ask them to actually do it. And in a dream world, we'd have these words being reinforced across the school, right? Or across grade levels. The third type of vocabulary is just definitions given by the teacher before the unit starts, so that the students know where to look it up. That could be on Canvas. That could be a printed out piece of paper that the students tape in their composition notebook. When I was at Park Rose and I taught 1984, I printed out definitions for my students. I had them tape it in their comp notebook because I didn't want to be the center of the internet necessarily being the center of where they went when they needed to find definitions. I wanted them to know exactly where to go, find it, and move on. Because the days are gone where we ask students to look up definitions as a practice. I'm not saying there aren't instances in where that's needed or that's appropriate, but studies show it's not the best use of time. And then the last are drive-by definitions or using contextual clues. These are the words that we need to define in the moment in order to move forward and understand what we are reading, but they are not, the prep isn't needed there. And so when I am looking at a unit, when I'm looking at a lesson, I think about what are the concepts, what's the academic vocabulary, what are the definitions, and then I skim the readings for words kids potentially won't know. And I'm like, I'm going to do that as a drive-by. Right? I'm going to crowdsource that one. We're going to use context clues to figure it out during a close reading activity. And I really parse these out because I think 1 and 2 are teacher-centered. I need to lead the instruction and prep this. 3 and 4, I want to make student-centered. I want to give them the strategies for context clues. I want them to know exactly where to go to find these definitions. And I'll have more concrete examples of this in a bit. There's language structures, and this really is like, it is a focus in ELA, right? But that syntax, that grammar, when we have students who exit out of tier 3 intervention, one of the most powerful things we can do for them is teach them grammatical structures. And it's really powerful and helpful for all students. Signposts, otherwise, which can also be known as transition words and phrases. For example, having them look for words that signal chronology. Have students look for words like however that signal contrast, right? Knowing these words and what they mean is really powerful when students are analyzing the structure of a text or trying to identify an argument. And then we have semantics, which is really determining meaning through words or groups of words. And I want to take a moment to note and just elevate the idea or the truth that when our multilingual learners come to our classrooms and we are reading maybe texts that have colloquialisms in them, it's important for us to really uncover what those mean, right? It's raining cats and dogs. And I have a friend who's French, and I used to teach English with her, so she and I used to dork out about these things, but she used to tell me all of the colloquialisms in French, and I would just laugh because I could imagine being a student, an American student, where my L1 is English, in a French classroom and someone saying that, and I would be like, I don't know what that means, right? And so that's kind of just an example of these semantics. How do we uncover these things that maybe saying one thing but mean another or mean something deeper? Second to last, we have verbal reasoning, making inferences, deciphering abstract language, and understanding the author's intent, which goes hand in hand. I mean, all these are related, but goes hand in hand with these language structures because these skills that we obtain in that language structure category help us with our verbal reasoning. And then literacy knowledge, right? Which we talked about a couple minutes ago, understanding the structures of charts, graphs, genres, and how different texts are organized. Because what we don't want is we don't want our students to encounter a text, have no idea how to navigate it, and then it's failure to launch, right? We want to give them those tools. So I'm going to we have about 19 minutes left. I'm going to go into strategies, but before that, I'd like to take 1 to 2 minutes. Does anyone have any questions or anything you think that needs to be added? Since I have experts in the Zoom room, does anyone want to come off mute, ask a question or share anything?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, Evan.
Do you know of any sources or materials, or if you know of any strategies that do address word recognition at the secondary level? Just because, like, I feel pretty confident about the language comprehension and the strategies that you're talking about, but kind of learning more about word recognition and the science of reading at like the primary level, having a really hard time adapting those teaching strategies to those that are so much older when you often take like a very elementary tone to have to structure word recognition lessons.
Yeah, no, definitely. I have something for you. Email me. I have a free resource I can send you. And then you and I can also set up a Google Meet, and anyone can join if you would like. I was actually a literacy TOSA for a while in Portland Public Schools and working with Tier 3 intervention, especially, and kind of what that looks like. And also with morphology. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I can send you and talk to you about. So just email me. And then if anyone else wants to email me with those same questions, we can set up a Google Meet and talk about it. And I can share resources or whatever you need.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, I'm going to move on. But again, please email me with those questions, and I love talking about that stuff too. Okay, so I want to talk about multilingual learners briefly. How do the strands of the reading rope relate to the needs of multilingual learners? Well, take a look at the top. If we have a newcomer who's skilled at reading in their first and subsequent languages, but is new to English, they're going to need that word recognition, right? And our newcomers ideally have that that ELD class, right? But I think that it is a ongoing question. I think in education that when we have a newcomer put into a algebra 3-4 class, what are we doing here? How are we supporting that student, right? And those are things we're talking about in Portland Public Schools currently. Um, how do we have those scaffolds in place, but how do we also take them away while still teaching the wide range of learners in our class? And we're having those discussions. And so, like, if you email me and I can email you also the stuff that we're talking about with this as well. We have our newcomers that are emerging readers and an emerging reader in first and subsequent languages. These students are SIFE students, maybe who have interrupted education. We have to realize we have to hit them with both at the same time. And that's a lot of work on their part and a lot of prepping on our part. And, of course, we're educators. We do what we need to do, but it's important to recognize that they do need both. And then our intermediate multilingual learners are students who are not in a newcomer class, but maybe still need some more development. The things that we need to focus on with them are, and you can see a plus in the middle of the two ropes, that's fluency. There's a plus by background knowledge, vocabulary, and language structures. Those are the four things I think we really need to emphasize with our intermediate multilingual learners. Um, and this touches a little bit about, Evan, what you asked potentially. There are exceptions to the rule. However, it's the core teacher's job to provide access points to the core Tier 1 curriculum for students who need Tier 3 literacy support. And this is this is us helping our teachers, right? It's not just the teacher's job, but it's the teacher's that's their job, right? But it is not the core teacher's job to provide Tier 3 literacy intervention for students during core instruction. Those are two different things. Um and I'll say that like Tier 3 needs to be happening outside of the core classroom while we're supporting the student to access the core content. And I just will say this, giving students who are emerging decoders, giving them audio text is helpful, but it is imperative that if we as teachers are giving audio text to our students, that there are other people in the building who are giving the students Tier 3 instruction, so the kiddos are getting both. Because without Tier 3, without that word recognition support, the audio text is a crutch. We don't want it to be a crutch. We want it to be a temporary support for language comprehension. So I'm going to talk about content area strategies today. I linked some disciplinary strategies into the PowerPoint, but because of time, I'm only going to talk about content area literacy strategies. The difference between the two, content area literacy strategies, they're processes that are common across disciplines. So there are things that a science, a math, an ELA teacher can do. Disciplinary literacy is really these experiences and these skills that are specific to that discipline. What is it like to read as a scientist? What is it like to read and write as a literary critic? And I don't know if you look through the Oregon's Adolescent Literacy Framework, but on page 103, it starts with the disciplinary literacy suggestions, and it is fantastic. I looked through it and I was like, this is amazing. And so I would recommend, if you're interested in looking more into it, start at page, I mean, the whole thing's really, it's a fantastic manual. It's a fantastic piece of literature. But on page 103 is when those disciplinary specific literacy suggestions start for reading, writing, and speaking as well, I believe. And they really give some concrete ideas, and there's links to it. And you can find that if you click like on this disciplinary literacy box, the Adolescent Literacy Framework is hyperlinked. And that's just an example of what you can find. Okay, so let's move into strategies. Strategies for background knowledge. Well, I'm just going to share four. So the first is a give one, get one, right? This is something that a lot of us know. It's where students, it can be informal. You can have students get up and just share and bounce around. You can also have students maybe write an idea on a Post-it about a topic that you want to cover. What do they notice? Two people, connect, they share what they noticed, and then they trade, right? And then I would go on and read what my partner originally wrote, so that we're sharing and cultivating knowledge to build that background knowledge. The thing about this that's important to note is, as a teacher, it's impossible to control for what the kiddos talk about. So if there's a specific body of knowledge you want your kiddos to know, 2, 3, and 4 are what you want to focus on for background knowledge, right? Because you want to control it, right? And so that could be giving them notes, and the next day have them overwriting notes. We have great Avid has illuminated that research that says if a student overwrites their notes within, I think, 72 hours, that means go back and highlight, circle, underline, and ask questions or summarize. Then the students will retain 80%, up to 80% of what they learned. That could be a strategy for students going back and gaining background knowledge and revisiting their notes. you could give them historical or socio-political background. When I taught AP language and composition at Parkrose High School, no, excuse me, AP literature and composition at Parkrose High School, we would have the students at the beginning of the year memorize all of the literary periods, and we would teach them about the art and the history that was going on, like to the point where we wanted them to be able to distinguish between the Victorian and Edwardian period, slight but different. Because then, when we would give them passages from literature second semester, they would be able to look at the date that it was written and then think about what was happening during that period and be able to really make some deep claims and be able to orient themselves really in this character development and in these conflicts because of the author's influence potentially during that time. Right. And so, really, as an English, and I will say this because we have ELA teachers in the room, and for any ELA teachers who watch this, right? The longer I taught, the more I realized that if I want my students to really think deeply about literature, and that's fiction, nonfiction, they need to understand the historical and sociopolitical time, and that's where you get those really great deep claims and the really analytical reasoning. And then last, and this is like I would say was inspired by my colleague who's a science person, science and math, but she taught science, really giving phenomenological context, things found in everyday life, right? That can help kind of like anchor students in what they're about to learn. Second is vocabulary, or next I want to talk about vocabulary. So what I used to do when I taught was I would choose one or two concepts from the essential questions of the unit, and we would do a concept map. I actually have, did my screen pop up where it says make a copy? Do you see that? Can I get like, okay, cool.
Yes.
I did a first copy of this, so you can make a copy for yourself if you're interested. And this is a concept map. I have a blank concept map here and a filled concept map, or partially filled, I should say, to show you a model. Now you'll see it's partially filled because the parentheses is where we would put parts of speech. And then the blank spots are where students would finish sentences or add more. So the concept map was really important because I would want to revisit this concept because we would ask comprehension questions utilizing these concepts because for the end of the unit so that they would have these wealth of notes and thoughts and annotations for the end of the unit assessment. And the concept, it's really critical to do a concept map with students because concepts are things that we need to like pick apart and really analyze from our point of view. So when we teach a concept, it's not just giving kids something to fill out. It's if you have a dot camera, you either have a blank one that you know you're going to fill in, or you give the kids a partially filled out one and you do the repeat after me, identity, identity, identity is this part of speech, you write it in, right? Here's an example sentence. You have them fill it in. You talk about synonyms for our multilingual learners and everyone. You talk about the word family. How does the word change as the parts of speech change? That's really helpful for our students who are learning English and our students who are pushing themselves in their writing. You do the definition, essential characteristics, example, non-examples, and have them write their own sentence. And you have them keep it. And then you revisit this because that helps them really be able to build that schema when you're asking them to think about complex topics. Ooh, we just skipped, excuse me for one moment. We skipped forward. We are not done yet. One moment. So I'm just going to talk while I go back. So, one moment. So while the second type of vocabulary, everyone, I'm going to refresh. So give me a moment. I'm stuck in annotation land. Hold on. Just going to refresh and go back and keep talking. So when we're thinking about vocabulary also, present. All right, thumbs up if you can see my screen, if the vocabulary, yay, okay, thanks for your feedback, everyone. Okay, so academic vocabulary. There are so many exhaustive lists that you'll find online. What I like to link is this former English teacher, his name's Jim Burke. He has this sheet just called the A list. And he says if you just teach these 15 things throughout the year and connect them to the standards that you're teaching, the prompts that you're using, the directions that you're giving kiddos, and you teach these words, students are really going to be able to have that efficacy to kind of to attack a prompt and know exactly what their next steps are. But it's not just good enough to say, here's the definition. We need to teach our academic vocabulary in almost like a abbreviated model of a concept map. And I assume a lot of you have heard of something like the Freyer model, right? Where we have our students writing the definition, a characteristic, examples, non-examples, maybe a picture. And we just have students kind of like utilizing the word a little bit more than just a definition so that they can play around with kind of the bounds of the meaning. And then from there, revisit it maybe. If we have a prompt, we could say, go back to your academic word list. You're being asked to analyze, turn to your partner, what does that mean? And then all of a sudden they're building this somewhat functional knowledge of those academic vocabulary words they're going to see in all their disciplines. I would like to also draw your attention to the best, in my humble opinion, dictionary in the world, the Longman Dictionary. It is linked. This is what it looks like. I have like a beat up copy that I've carried around for over 20 years, and there's an online version. This dictionary was shared with me, and I guess now they have it in Japanese and Korean and there's other languages. But what's really beautiful about Longman is what they strive to do is they strive to have their definitions simple enough that kiddos will not have to look up or ask what any of the words in the definitions mean. Critical for our students, very helpful for our multilingual learners. I linked that there on the slide for you. And I actually use it when I'm putting together lessons for vocabulary. I use their definitions exclusively. I find them wildly helpful. So we have about 4 minutes left, and I kind of wanted to pause here because what I wanted to do was because we're going to go back into the main session now in 54 seconds. So I would just like to thank you so much for coming, everyone. Hopefully something was reviewed for you that you already knew and you were reminded of. Maybe you learned one new resource, maybe you learned a couple new things. And Evan, I really appreciated your question about those word recognition pieces, because I really need to think about how to speak about those when I present in the future. And I look forward to seeing your email, and anyone else, please email me and we can continue the conversation. So thank you so much.
Morgan, thank you so much for your time and your energy and just your passion about how to do this work well. And I think we are going to get drawn back into the main room. But Morgan, thank you so much.